Hi, my name is Uli Gretzel. I'm a professor in tourism at the University of Queensland, and I'm a social scientist. My PhD is actually in communications, and I also do a lot of work related to technology and people's use of technology and how it changes perceptions and interactions. So the question today, the first one that I would like to address is really about I guess the perceptions of women and um, women really and sustainability and women, I guess, as really fundamental actors in the world of well, in the world and then also in relationship to sustainability. So this is really not my research topic, so I'm going to keep this very brief. But I think the important thing here is that this has really not been recognized at all. So it's almost like um, uh, women are not showing up, whether it's in the history books or in science in terms of thinking about sustainability. And I think there is a very conceptualization of what sustainability means if we don't look at that female world and the roles women play in, I guess, uh, being actors, but then also maybe being leaders in this field. So I think really sustainability from a women's perspective needs to look at different issues. It's not so much about maybe these very straightforward, open manipulations of nature, but more about women and how they educate children and women and food preparation and women and maybe the different ways of moving through space. They're taking care of animals, their roles, I guess, in communities. So I think it's important to look at the role of women in all sorts of issues, all sorts of realms, because I think fundamentally there's just a different power relationship going on, a different approach, and then a different conceptualization about really what sustainability means and what can be done from a women's perspective. So I think the female perspective is important, and female actors so far have not really been taken into account. So I think what I'm saying is, yeah, we look at people in general, but there's a very specific female perspective that we're missing out on. So I would like to shift to that second question of different perceptions of sustainability and what that means. And I'm coming at this from a communication perspective, and in communication we talk a lot about frames and what they do and why they are important, but also sometimes why they are dangerous. So if you think about sustainability, it has been framed as a political issue, and that automatically restricts us in terms of what can and cannot be talked about, what is and what is not talked about, what is discussed, what is acted upon. So frames are very powerful organizing principles that people use to kind of make sense of the world. They're schemas that we have in our head. So I guess the question we need to ask ourselves is what it means to maybe change some of the existing frames on sustainability, and how to really, capture that women's perspective, because these frames then change or influence the way we talk about things. So some of the research that we have done specifically looks at sustainability and how people think about it, and we see very big difference in terms of I guess perceptions of what sustainability involves. And we also ask specifically about women and sustainability, and it's kind of scary that a lot of people haven't even thought about it. And I guess once they start talking about it, realize that it is actually quite an important topic, and there's lots of different issues related to women. Now, we have mostly asked activists in this space, and then of course they have really been concerned with power relationships a lot. So women per se, I think, also represent the underrepresented, the invisible in many ways. So many things that are being said about women, I guess. So from a communication perspective, we really also need to think about what role the media play. And you need to understand media as a business, I guess, and how it is important for them to frame issues in a certain way, because that just allows them to very quickly get audiences think about specific things in certain ways, a way for them to appropriate the messages to make them more exciting for their audiences, to create controversy. And unfortunately, women are usually not, I guess, an important framing principle. So women and sustainability, what we find in our research is that there's really different perceptions in terms of what women can contribute to sustainability. And so from very, I guess, interesting kinds of knowledge that reside in women to different ways of acting. So an understanding that women have a different way of approaching conflict, for example. And I would caution there a little bit to generalize across all women here. I think we need to be careful to understand, okay, what kinds of women are these that we're talking about in whatever we are looking at. So the third question is really, okay, what does this mean for your research, and how do you capture these different perceptions and different roles? And so from a social science perspective, of course, you can ask people, right? You can try to tap into these mental concepts, these frames, these schemas, these perceptions that people have. Well, there's a big assumption there that you can actually access that very readily, and modern psychology is starting to recognize that it's actually not always true that what we express is actually what we think. And so there's certain issues in terms of just asking people, because there's a lot of um, social desirability bias. People will tell you what they think you want to hear or they should say. So whatever the question is, and whatever the relationship is between the person asking the question and the person answering, we need to consider how that might influence these answers. But then also, I guess for some of these issues, especially in the context of women and sustainability, since they're not being talked about, there might not be any existing frames that people can just retrieve from memory because they have frequently thought about it. So I think we need to think about what happens in a person like that when you ask them about the role of women in sustainability, for example. So if you put them on the spot, they will have to come up with an answer, because from a communication perspective, we assume that if you ask me, or it's just an interaction paradigm that I have to provide an answer. So I just come up with something like I just did right now in this conversation here. But you actually want people to reflect on this. So we need to think about methodologies to allow people to really engage with the topic. So I think that's really important for research, to not assume that you can go out and just ask this question. I guess, well, you can, but then what you will get back is really this top of mind association, and then people will just portray because you have asked them a question. So I think in this context, it's probably important to think about methodologies that let people reflect. And I think, even using art or different forms of technology might be interesting here, because some of these things might also be hard to put into words. I think it's also important to understand the power relationships. So if you go out and ask women in a community, but they are surrounded by men, and that might actually be an issue for them to really express what they're thinking. I think it's also dangerous to think that women and sustainability is only a women's issue. So we've been trying to capture male perspectives on this topic as well, and they have been quite insightful, I have to say. So the other thing I would like to mention is that it's not just about these perceptions. I think if you look at discursive psychology, the assumption there is that also some things are performed in communication. So some things are negotiated, some things are expressed through discourse. And so we need some methodologies that can allow us to capture that, these kind of, going back and forth, negotiating definitions and frames and issues. So part of what we have done is really look at social media as a way of capturing a discourse that thanks to the technology, is actually publicly available to us and is unmediated. So you don't necessarily have a researcher present here. So the power of looking online and looking into virtual communities, looking on social media, is that it's more of a, I guess, raw data that usually we don't get if we ask people and if we are present as researchers in the field. So there's different ways in which you can approach that. One big paradigm here is called ethnography. So basically ethnography done online, where the assumption is that you still need to immerse yourself quite heavily in an online community in order to really capture and be able to interpret that online discourse appropriately. And the other approach is really the text mining, sentiment analysis, where you go in and extract tons of data. So you have lots of data points coming from different people, automatically, I guess, sampled through whatever the procedure is that you establish for the crawling. And then you take, I guess, a look at that discourse at a higher level. So you will not get those very rich, insightful, I guess, notions of what sustainability or women and sustainability mean to these people, but more of an overall general idea of what that discourse looks like, more from a society level. So we have done that, and also specifically looked at media and how media frame these discourses. So you have a very specific group of players there, institutional players, but we can also look at you know, government documents and how they talk about women and sustainability. You could look at conservation organizations, activist groups, and how they frame women and sustainability as an issue. So I think there's lots of opportunities, and hopefully this has given you some insights in maybe how to think about it. So maybe another question to think about is really the role of media and how to, I guess, how they help promote that discourse. I think we need to distinguish here between traditional media and social media. So I think from really maybe thinking about teaching, what I could think of, I guess, is really social media as a platform where students, for example, really can interact with other students. So what I have done in one of my classes is that I connected them via Facebook, but it can be, you know, any kind of platform, to other students in different countries, and asked them to create videos and I guess even word representations, tag clouds, or even discussions that really engaged, other people in this topic. So I guess the promise of social media there is really that it can make the discourse visible in many ways, so that it's not just spoken word, it's not just text, it's really a multimedia environment, because sometimes it's also, I mean, that's the power of social media to, if you show a video of women and for example, them carrying water across very long distances, and therefore living climate change on a daily basis, I think that's a very powerful message. And social media has really developed many ways in which you can, express, I guess, views. And so you can have pictures overlaid with words. I mean, there's just, I guess, this culture of open discourse. So I think for students to is very exciting, but I think there needs to be an understanding that there's an open discourse, and people can respond to that. So I wouldn't keep it necessarily to just a classroom. I would go out and make it an open discourse. All right, so Gillian also wants me to talk a little more about ethnography and culture. So ethnography, I guess the beauty of it is that you go native in the sense that you become a member of a very specific group, or the assumption is that you need to learn the language in order to understand, I guess, the subtleties in the discourse that happen. And so I actually have done a lot of research on recreational vehicle travelers, RVers, and you wouldn't assume that RVers have a language, but I can tell you that it took me a long time to understand what they were talking about. So, for example, for them to express identity, they talk about the size of the vehicles, so how many feet that vehicle has in length. So it's I guess it assumes that you need to have that cultural knowledge to really understand what the meanings are behind the words that are being portrayed. Whereas if you do just a broader analysis of what words are used, what words are connected, or who talks, who doesn't. Those are more higher level structural issues. Now with ethnography, you go deep, and you want to understand the very I guess the very embedded meanings and the power relationships and the power dynamics, and why people say certain things, and also maybe understand some of the codes they use if they cannot say certain things. So I think we also sometimes assume that everything can be said, and I don't think that's necessarily the case. Some things are taboo, some things are maybe hard to describe, and especially with women and sustainability, we need to understand who says what in what context and from what position. So women and sustainability, I think, is fundamentally a power issue, and so in order to understand the discourse, we need to understand the power relationships. So I guess from a research perspective, that means maybe even a Foucauldian analysis of who is in power, what gives them power, and really, yeah, what is the role of women, and how women traditionally, I guess, have or have not been taken into account in the arena of sustainability.